A presentation by Leah Haley. Leah Haley has experienced ongoing abductions by alien entities going back to her childhood. During one such encounter, the UFO she was on board was shot down, apparently by the U.S. Air Force, who recovered her from the craft.
I've experienced what I consider some extreme forms of harassment by military government officials. At least I believe they're military and government officials. I can't prove it. For instance, I had an encounter one night. I was abducted by the chalky-colored creatures, and their normal medical experiments were performed on me. But they didn't bring me all the way home that night. Instead, what they did was drop me off in a field near my home. I remember being somewhat programmed. I felt as if I were in some kind of a zombie state, and I remember thinking to myself as I was looking up into the sky, I've got to get back home. I've got to get back home. And while I was standing out in the field thinking about that, as if I were programmed, a helicopter landed in front of me. And so a bunch of men in wearing green fatigues and carrying big black machine guns jumped out of the helicopter and came up to me and grabbed me. And I started yelling expletives at them as soon as I realized what was going on, and struggled with them, but to no avail. And they dragged me into the helicopter, and as I approached the helicopter, I saw a man wearing Air Force Blue uniform. He seemed to be the one in charge of the situation. I remember him telling me that I was a troublemaker and they were going to have to shut me up. And this was about the point in time that I had decided I was going to undergo hypnotic regression to recover my memories. Anyway, I was taken aboard the helicopter. It seemed that we flew a short distance, and the helicopter landed near a building that had restricted on the door. And I was shoved inside, and as soon as I got inside the door, the man in the Air Force Blue uniform said to a group of men who were apparently waiting for me to arrive, "Here she is. She's a cocky little bitch." And there was a man in a khaki uniform standing at the opposite side of the room, and he looked at me coldly and said, "Well, we'll just take care of that." And they did. The next thing I remembered was someone giving me a shot in my right arm, and I remembered becoming very dizzy and feeling as if I were going to pass out. When I remembered this encounter, I was very upset. I felt that my rights had been violated. I was very upset at being drugged against my will, being taken off to a base and questioned and being brainwashed and not remembering everything that happened to me. And I felt that I had a right to know what was going on, and yet I was given no information. That's only one incident that I've had with apparent military government people. And then a thing came out of my mouth in 1991. Now this is magnified 250 times, but what it was a little tiny square that was kind of metallic, and you see it's not square now. That's because some MUFON members had the object analyzed for me, and the person who analyzed it had to cut away part of the material to find out what it was. This thing just worked its way out of my lower gum. I just felt something trying to get out of my gum behind my lower front teeth. And, you know, it was trying to get out of my gum. And I messed with it for a long time, you know, trying to dig it out with my fingernail and dislodge it with my tongue, and it was sticking out of my gum from the inside of my gum. Eventually, after messing with it for quite some time, I was able to dislodge it and scrape it out. And
I was holding this little object in the palm of my hand and thinking, what in the world is that? How did it get into my mouth? How long has it been there, etc. My husband walked into the room, and I showed it to him, and I said, what is this thing? He says, it looks like a computer chip. Where did you get it? And I said, out of my mouth. Well, what it turned out to be, as far as the analysis went, was, oh gosh, I don't have that in front of me, but it was approximately 80% copper and approximately 20% zinc with traces of aluminum and silicon, which really didn't tell me a whole lot. It told me what the material was made of. It was consistent with common brass, but it didn't explain how long it had been in my mouth and how it got there and why it was there. I still don't have the answers to those questions. Another thing that convinced me that my experiences were real and I wasn't going crazy is that I awakened in the morning with numerous marks on my body at various times. You know, I'd wake up and have injection marks on my body, scars, some that weren't there the day before but appeared overnight and were healed, scoop marks, various kinds of bruises, what I call brands, like I might have this red, solid red triangle on my body, or a circle. Vaccinations, sometimes I had marks on me that looked like weird kinds of vaccinations. And for a long period of time, I had these deep indentations in my lower back. I still don't know how those got there. They were on my back for a long period of time. I never did hurt myself there. And I never had any bleeding or anything like that. It's just that they were there. Now, I can't tell you how those got on my body. All I know is that when they appeared, I was having experiences. But I cannot relate this particular set of marks to any particular experience. There's this triangular mark that was up here on my shoulder. There it is, a smaller version of it. Actually, it's the same mark, it's just a different photograph. And then what this was a series of punctures in a circle that was on my back. It doesn't show up very well in the slide. The main reason is because it was a couple of weeks old when the photo was taken, and here's why. Like I said, my husband was away from home when much of this was going on. And I noticed one day some marks on my back. Actually, it was about right in here. Let's see, this upper part of my back. I noticed some red marks on my back, but looking into a mirror backwards, I couldn't see that they formed a pattern, you know, because of the angle. However, a couple of weeks after I saw those red marks and my husband met me in Florida, we were doing some research investigating down in the Gulf Breeze area at that time, and my husband met me down there one weekend when we went down to do some research, and that's when he saw the mark on my back, and he said that it was a series of punctures on my back. And what made me discover it was that we were spending the weekend with some friends, and when I took a shower, something was burning my back horribly. My friends had a different kind of soap than what I was accustomed to, and I have very sensitive skin, and so it was just really burning my back. So I went downstairs where my husband was, and I lifted my t-shirt down so that he could see what was on my back, and that's when he discovered the mark. And he said it was a series of punctures. And the reason it was burning is because some of them had not healed. Some of them had healed. And one or two of them really don't show up very well at all. He could see them, and my friends there saw them, but it's hard to see in the picture, the ones that had healed. I have no recollection of what caused the mark. It was a mystery to me as to what caused that. No memory associated with it. Well, a little bit of one, but I'm not sure if it went with that particular experience or not. I was dragged quite unwillingly into a conference room. As soon as I was shoved into the room, and by the way, they were quite rough with me, and I didn't like that very much either. I was shoved into the room, and there was a guy standing at the door waiting for me to come in, and he shoved a needle into my right arm. And after I was given a shot, I was shoved down into a chair. Now, there were people seated around a conference room table waiting for me to be brought in. Another incident that I had that was quite unpleasant was being in a place that I call a deprogramming chamber. I don't know where this chamber is located. I don't remember how I got there. I don't remember how I got back home. I just remember some of the things that took place in the deprogramming chamber, and that is that I was strapped into a chair, and inside some kind of a structure that it looked like it had a domed ceiling. That's my perception of it anyway. And I had the perception of the ceiling coming down and going back up and coming down and going back up. And maybe I was going up and down, I'm not sure, but the perception I had was that of the ceiling coming down and going back up. And I remembered extremely bright white light being flashed into my eyes, and then a symbol, and then the bright white light again, and the symbol, bright white light symbol, over and over and over again. And the man in the khaki uniform, which I feel certain is the same one that was in the earlier experience in the conference room, the guy in the khaki uniform told me that his group did not like the information the aliens were giving me, and so his group intended to wipe those memories from my mind, and they would replace those memories with those of their own choosing. In other words, he said that his group was going to implant memories in my head. That's what I would remember, and not instead of what the aliens had told me. So I found that experience quite unpleasant also. Excuse me, just 1 second. Another experience that I had that was a little bit unusual was this. One night I was standing in line with a bunch of other abductees, and I felt as if we had been extremely heavily drugged, and we were waiting for something in line, single file. We were standing single file, and I was looking around to see if I recognized anybody else in line. And I turned around, and at first I thought I saw an abductee friend of mine, but then when I looked more closely, I could see that it wasn't my friend at all. It looked like an alien instead. So I was trying to fight the effects of the drugs, which is very difficult because whatever we'd been given was extremely strong. But I walked up closer to this alien. As I started moving up closer to it, it moved. And I thought, there's something wrong with this situation. You know, what's wrong here? And first thing that I noticed was that the alien was shaped more like a small woman than it was an alien. And then I saw it bend its elbows and bend its knees when it walked. And the chalky colored creatures that I'd seen didn't move in quite the same way. They didn't move in such a jointed manner as we humans do. And so I thought, oh my gosh, you know, there's something wrong here. So I got closer and closer to the alien and got right up in its face. And I could see where the black eyes were really just patches sewn on the fabric. I was so close that I could actually see where the black patches were stitched. I could see the stitching. I could see the weave in the fabric. Now, after that, I thought, oh my gosh, if these people ever discover that that I'm aware enough to realize what's going on here, I'm going to be in real deep trouble. You know, they'll give me a super duper dose of the drug or whatever to erase my memory, and I won't remember this, so I'd better pretend like I don't catch on. So I turned around in line and just stood there like a good little zombie, and shortly after that we were moved forward and put into some sort of transport device like a tram, and the door slid open horizontally. When the transport device stopped, doors on the opposite side opened, we stepped out, and that's where my memory ends. I can't remember anything else after that point in time. Now, if you go do some searching on the internet, in some of the debunking, what you're going to find is that Leah Haley had this experience that was reminiscent of an X-Files episode, because there was an episode quite like that on X-Files, and that's true. But whatever debunker decided to throw that onto the internet failed to mention that Leah Haley discussed this experience in her lectures long before the X-Files episode was ever written and aired. So just keep that in mind when you're doing research, you know. So he got it right, he just got it backwards, you know. It's like the X-Files episode was reminiscent of what Leah Haley had talked about in her lecture months before. Another experience that I had occurred in the year 2000. During the night, I had some weird kind of an experience where I felt as if I was going down into an underground facility where there were aliens. And I was terrified, for some reason, terrified to the extent that I really thought that I was going to have a heart attack. I was, at the time that took place, I was going down into an elevator-like device. I felt kind of like it reminded me of some of the movies I've seen where you had mine workers going down into a mine shaft via an old elevator of sorts. And that's a sensation I got, and that's what it seemed like to me. And I knew that whatever was going to happen to me once I was taken to that facility was going to be awful. And I was just screaming in terror. Now, what happened, though, was that I managed to scream or moan enough that it awakened my husband. This is husband number 2. His husband number 1, who used to be who was the anesthetist, couldn't handle all this stuff that was going on, and he particularly couldn't handle my speaking out about this subject, so he dumped me. But now husband number 2, well, you have to laugh about it. There's not much else we can do. So husband number 2, who was quite supportive emotionally anyway, said that I was moaning in my sleep, and he awakened me and asked me to tell him, you know, what was causing me to be so terrified in my sleep. And we were sitting there in bed at 4:30 in the morning trying to determine whether I had just come back from an abduction experience that I remembered only part of, or whether in my sleep I was remembering one that had occurred in the past. And I really don't know, frankly, whether I just had one that was horrible or whether I was remembering one that was horrible. At any rate, we were talking about it, you know, giving the pros and cons of each scenario. And I was really tired, felt exhausted, and after we discussed it and didn't come to any conclusion, I was able to fall back asleep. But my husband just stayed up. You know, we discussed it for about 30 minutes, so it was 5 a.m. Then it was time for him to get up and go to work pretty soon anyway, so he stayed up and got dressed for work. At 5:30, he came back into the bedroom and woke me up and told me I had to get up and go to work. Well, for some reason, I felt awful. I felt as if a truck had run over me. I had no energy, just totally stressed out, drained. And I said, okay, I'll get up in a minute. And he left. He went ahead and left for work. But I couldn't get up. Soon after he left, I heard this voice in my head, and it said, stay in bed. You have a headache. And I knew it was coming from an external source because I'd had this kind of thing happen to me before. And as I was told by this voice that I had a headache, my head literally started hurting. And it repeated, stay in bed, you have a headache. And mentally, I tried to fight against this voice and say, go away, I have to go to work. And I really did need to go to work. You know, I wasn't trying to slack off and get out of it. And so I worked at a place where I was paid by the hour, and if I didn't go to work, I didn't get paid. And the plant where I worked was going to be shut down for 2 weeks pretty soon, and I really, really needed every penny that I could acquire because for 2 weeks I was going to get no pay. So I kept trying to force myself to get out of bed, but I was powerless. This voice rendered me totally powerless. And as this was going on, I heard what sounded like a helicopter come over the roof and stop. And I was getting weaker and weaker and weaker and paralyzed at that point. At the time that the helicopter came over, you know, I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything at all. Then suddenly, as I was about to just fall into a deep sleep or pass out or whatever, suddenly I heard the helicopter fly away. And then this voice said, oh, that wasn't a helicopter. That was just an airplane with engine trouble. At that same point in time, my husband came flying into the house, flying into the bedroom, screaming, Leah, are you okay? Are you okay? And I said, no, I'm not okay. Why do you ask? You're supposed to be at work. And he said, what happened was he had started to work and he had gotten some distance and he had an upset stomach and he had to come back home. And when he did, he caught the helicopter hovering over our rooftop, just right above the roof. And he made a rude gesture at it and it flew away. So the point here is that he caught this helicopter, and I don't imagine it was a helicopter itself because that's just a piece of machinery, but whoever was in that helicopter conducting mind control on me, rendering me powerless to move and do anything. Now, I don't know what the intentions were. You know, I don't know because my husband caught it that day. A couple of weeks later, when the plant was shut down, my husband came home at the end of the day after a full day of work and caught one of those helicopters over the roof again. And I don't know what happened that day. I can't tell you what happened that day. I don't know. But again, the helicopter flew off. It probably got me that time, but I have no memory whatsoever of what happened that day. None. And that has happened quite a few times with me, is having periods of time where I have absolutely no memory of what occurred. It's extremely bothersome to know that there are days out of your life where you can't remember anything and you wonder where you were, what you were doing, did you do anything wrong, did anybody do anything to you that could have permanent repercussions. You know, there's still so many unanswered questions. Even though I've had experiences myself, I still have lots and lots of questions that go unanswered. The black helicopters still buzz my house from time to time. Every once in a while they'll come in and they'll just circle right over it. And I've moved, by the way. You know, it happened when I lived in Mississippi, but not to my neighbors. When I've lived in 4 places in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, which is where I live now. Same thing. The black unmarked helicopters don't bother my neighbors, but in all 4 places I've lived in Murfreesboro since 1995, they've come and circled my house, flown right over my roof, hovered over my roof. And it has happened several times this year even. I think May 4th was the last time it happened. I've taken pictures of them some of the times. Let's see. There's one of them. There's one of them. And there's another one. So I've got pictures of the May 4th one too, I think, but I didn't get those slides developed yet. You know, I don't even see any point in it. You know, they all look the same. So there you go. I've traced these helicopters to 2 different places. When I lived in Mississippi, I discovered that they were flying off from and landing at Columbus Air Force Base in Columbus, Mississippi. Where I live now, I've seen them take off from and land at Smyrna, Tennessee Airport, south of Nashville. And I don't know who they belong to yet. I intend to do a little bit more research on these things. Don't know if I'll get any answers, but I'm certainly going to try to find out who owns these things. I mentioned that mind control a little while ago, where this voice told me to stay in bed, that I was getting sick and getting a headache. Oh, by the way, it told me that I could call in sick later, too. It tried to put that into my head. But there are other times that mind control has happened when I was just driving down the road. I was driving to work one day when this voice told me to run the car next to me off the road. Luckily, I was able to identify that as mind control, and you know, I became aware of it. And of course, I didn't do what I was told. Another time, the same week, in fact, 1999, same week, I was told to stick my arm in the oven by this voice. So, whoever's doing this, they're not very nice people, and it makes me wonder about some of the things that are happening in the world, like the school shootings and things like that. You know, I have to ask myself the question, you know, is it possible that some of these things are occurring because some of these people are being used by this group conducting these experiments, or maybe it's gone past experimentation and these people are utilizing others to do things that are illegal. Another type of experience that I've had that I'm really having a lot of struggles with right now is what I call virtual reality experiences, and they're not necessarily bad. Some of them are. But virtual reality experiences, I did not coin that phrase. Some of my fellow abductees did. What I mean by that is that they're experiences that occur while I'm asleep, but at the time they're going on, they seem very, very real. It's like I'm acting in a play while I'm in my sleep time, you know, like I'm an actor in this play, but the play seems like reality, real life, while it's going on. And these are different from my normal dreams. So my normal dreams are not sequential necessarily. They don't necessarily make sense. They might jump from one scene to another or from one person to another without any kind of consistency or sequence or logic. But in these virtual reality experiences, there is sequence, there's logic, thought processes, analyses, and like I said, just like living life. they're not any different at all while they're occurring. Some of these involve situations so terrifying that I feel as if I'm going to have a heart attack while they're occurring. I had been leaning toward the theory that these scenarios are being beamed into my head via remote influencing or some other sort of mind control technology. But I also have to question whether or not some of these experiences maybe really did happen at some point in time and I'm remembering real events. And what really made me question this theory was in light of the recent news stories about the Iraqi prisoners being tormented and humiliated by the use of attack dogs. And the reason that got my attention is because in some of these most terrifying virtual reality experiences that I've had, that's exactly what was happening to me. Anybody who's been who has done any monitoring of me would know that I am terrified of those attack dogs. I was bitten when I was a child, and although, you know, I have nothing against dogs, and I had my own dogs when I was growing up, I still have this horrible fear of other people's attack dogs. And, you know, I can't help it. I'm pretty sure it stems from having been being bitten as a child. And I have had numerous virtual reality experiences where attack dogs were gnawing off my skin, you know, and I have to wonder if I've really had some experiences at the hands of these mind controllers where they were really using these attack dogs to try to get me to do whatever it was they wanted me to do. And I don't know. I don't have that question answered yet. You know, I don't know if all of these virtual reality experiences are beamed into my head from some external source, or whether some things really happened and I'm just remembering those past events. I don't know. That question's still up in the air. I know that some of them are beamed from an external source. Some of them are, but I don't know about all of them. There's one experience that I had that really bothers me that I wrote about in Unlocking Alien Closets that had to deal with a factory, and that virtual reality experience keeps on haunting me and haunting me and haunting me. And I'm wondering, you know, if it was just an implanted memory, why does it haunt me so much? So I have that question still. So I'm doing research now on virtual reality experiences, and I hope that the next time I come back here, I hope I'll have more information on it. I don't know, but I'll try. I've been trying to find the answers to my own questions, obviously, since I have so many remaining, and been doing a lot of research, talking to abductees all over the country, talking to researchers all over the country. Luckily, because I'm out lecturing about this kind of thing, I run into hundreds of people who have things to say about this subject. And of course, the internet has helped a lot. And in the course of my research, I've been able to come across the pictures of some of my human abductors. And I've learned that these people have abducted other people I know also. And in the course of my research, actually my husband, my current husband, husband number 2, who's very supportive of what we're doing here, came across a picture of this thing. This is called a sticky shocker. What it is a non-lethal weapon used by law enforcement officers and military personnel. It uses stun gun technology. on a wireless self-contained projectile. The projectile carries a battery pack and associated electronics that will impart a short burst of high voltage pulses, and it is used to disable a human. Notice that it has short barbs on the end of it. Count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 barbs around it. These barbs are put on the end of this thing in order to penetrate thick clothing that a human being might be wearing. And here's another picture of it just to show you how big it is in relation to a human. And I fully believe that that is what is responsible for making this mark on my back. Notice I had punctures on my back, barbs on the sticky shocker, aligned with the punctures on my back. And note this, you couldn't see this in the other slide I had, but notice, bruise, bruise, bruise. Now, when my husband looked at my back and examined it, oh, by the way, there was another one of these down in my lower back on the left side also, but it had faded so much by then that it didn't show up in a photograph at all. Oh, it apparently had been there longer than this one had. But anyway, my husband saw these bruises next to this thing, and so we figured that what must have happened is when the person took the barbs out of my back, it's like they had to press their hand into my back to press down on my back to pull the barbs out of my back. We assume that that's what happened due to the location of this thing. So, that still didn't tell me who did it, who shot the thing at me. I still don't know that because I still have no memory. Whoever got me in the back. Apparently, I never did see them before I was hit, and then it was too late. Now, speaking of mind control, I'll go back one slide. Now, Sandra brought this up when she was up here, and she said that the CIA has lost or destroyed some documents about mind control. However, there are some that are available. Under the Freedom of Information Act, you can write to the CIA, and if you send them a $30 check, which I did, you will get back a letter like this. Now, I can't take credit for this. A friend emailed me about, it was early last fall, and told me that the CIA had released a lot of their MK Ultra Project Artichoke documents. And the friend said, if you write a letter in this format and send it to the CIA along with $30, you will get some CDs that have the MK Ultra documents on them. Well, I thought, yeah, right. I really was skeptical. I have to admit, I was skeptical of that, and I thought, what the heck, I want these documents so badly that the worst that can happen is that I'll lose $30. Okay, so I sent a letter in to the CIA and was totally surprised when a month later I received this letter, see, addressed to me from the CIA Information and Privacy Coordinator. And the letter explains that he has sent me the 3 CDs of the officially released MK Ultra and behavioral research documents, and he explains that it has to be on 3 CDs because there are almost 20,000 pages worth of documents. So, a person who says that mind control is not going on has not bothered to look at the fact that the CIA has admitted to conducting such experiments and has released some of these documents under the Freedom of Information Act. I've been too busy lecturing across the country to read 20,000 pages worth of documents. I do well to get my email answered. I have looked at a couple of them. The first one that I looked at was accounting documents, which of course I was interested in since I'm a CPA, and it said, you know, it told where some of the money went. $10,000 to this psychologist for conducting this kind of test, and $5,000 to this doctor for doing such and such. That kind of thing, telling where some of the money went. In a second document, which another friend had already emailed me a copy of this document, but I had to confirm for myself that it actually was on the CDs, and so I did confirm that. And here's the essence of that. It says, in essence, that the CIA conducted an experiment where this Miss X and Miss Y were brought in, and I'll call her Miss X anyway. Miss X hated guns. She wouldn't have anything to do with them. So the test was to see if Miss X, having been given a post-hypnotic suggestion, would pick up a gun and kill somebody, even though she hated guns. That was the test. Now, they had been these people had been given post-hypnotic suggestions the night before, and they were told that if somebody pointed a finger at them, that they would fall into this trance-like condition. So, on the night of the gun test, the finger was pointed. The subjects X and Y went into this alternate personality trance-like condition, and Miss X, given the directions, did pick up the gun and fire it at Miss Y. There were blanks in the gun, okay, so X did not actually kill Y, thankfully, but the point is that the CIA conducted the test. They admitted to giving people post-hypnotic suggestions and conditions under conditions like this, and they proved to themselves that they could make a person kill somebody else, even if he or she was totally against weapons and killing. So, I found that extremely disturbing, and extremely interesting, and extremely interested that the CIA has admitted to this kind of test. And you can get these documents yourself. Like I said, you don't have to believe me or anybody else. They're available. All you have to do is write the same kind of letter I wrote and send in your $30 check. You know, you have it for yourselves to examine. You also should know that the NSA and CIA also released UFO documents because of the Freedom of Information Act. You can go to their respective websites and find the UFO documents that they have released. As of April 28th, the NSA had 40 UFO-related documents on their website. The CIA had 278. Now, one of those sites is tricky to use. They're really smart. I have to give them credit for their intelligence. I put in UFOs, both with periods and without periods, unidentified flying objects, flying saucers, blah, blah, blah. I put in their search block on the website, search this site for these words. I tried all those words, and the response I got was, we have found 0 documents. However, I knew they were there. I knew the documents were there, so I kept on and on and on trying to find these documents on the website. And the way that you can find them is click on the subject line, the topic index. If you click on index and then scroll down to UFO, then they'll all come up. But if you try to do the search function, they won't. So just keep that in mind, but they are there. Another thing that I came across was that NASA has admitted to doing this mind reading experimentation. They say that they've been doing it because they want to read terrorists' minds at airports. So, point here is that we have the admission of this. Okay? That's the point. Some more research that I've done deals with a problem I had trying to mesh all these things that happened to me with my upbringing in my conservative Southern Baptist church. If you know anything about the conservative Southern Baptist church, you can imagine how difficult it was for me, having once been a Sunday school teacher and a Bible school teacher and being at church every time the door opened, trying to deal with my experiences in that context. It was real hard. I stopped going to church for about 10 years. I had a real problem. And I had a question though, how did my alien abduction experiences fit into everything else? So I had to go to the Bible and do research. And this was not taught to me in Sunday school, okay? I never saw it in a Sunday school book that I'd ever read about Genesis 6, 1 through 4, where Genesis talks about the spirit beings coming down from another place and mingling with the daughters of men and producing the hybrid giants, and that, in fact, I've discovered from the Bible, was where God got so ticked off about what was going on that he cut men's lives down to 120 years, which that's why we don't live to be 700 or 800 years old anymore, according to what I read in the Bible, is because God got ticked off that these hybrid giants were being created against his wishes. So I kept on looking in there, and in it, the scripture that I read said that the things didn't stop happening either. That kind of thing continued. So, I don't want to get into, I'm not about to get into religion or, any of that kind of stuff. I'm just the reason I'm talking about this is because, I wanted to share with you what questions I had as far as trying to put it together in the big scheme of things and in relation to where my teachings came from. And so that's what I found. So I was able to integrate what I'd been taught, or actually what I should have been taught, okay? I was able to put it together with what had happened to me so that it made a little bit more sense. In my research, in the biblical research, I also found the scriptural support for the existence of ghosts, and also the importance of paying attention to our dreams. So I found the background for that kind of thing too. So it made me pay a little bit more attention to that kind of thing. I also had a positive virtual reality experience. I told you a minute ago that I had some where there were dogs gnawing off my flesh, and those were extremely disturbing to me, but I also had a very positive one. This one that was extremely positive occurred when I was writing Unlocking Alien Closets, and I had a whole lot of unresolved issues at that period of time. And I still wasn't going to church either. Remember, I said that I was out of church for a long, long time. But I had a virtual reality experience that involved a nun and Jesus. Now, I thought it was extremely significant that I had a dream about a nun because I'd never had any kind of Catholic background whatsoever. As far as I knew, I'd never been in a Catholic church in my entire life. So I really had to pay attention to this one that involved a nun. I won't go into the details. I've written about them. But suffice it to say that I believe that this virtual reality experience came from a supernatural source, a positive supernatural source. It caused me to start going to church again, a particular church, and as soon as I started going to that particular church, some of the questions that I had that needed to be answered before I could complete Unlocking Alien Closets were answered in those first set of sermons that I went to at that church. So I thought that was really, really weird. It's not a Baptist church I'm going to, by the way, and I mean, it would have been okay. So, you know, like I said, I don't want to get into religion or anything, but I started going to a different kind, and I'm still going to that church because I'm getting some of the answers to my questions answered there. And it was because of this virtual reality experience that I started going there. And that's where that positive spiritual effect comes from, and why I labeled the subtitle what I did, including the word spirituality. It was a fluke how I got Unlocking Alien Closets published. I published it myself. I didn't have a penny. I had no idea under the sun where I was going to get the money to get that book printed. No idea whatsoever. But as soon as I got one of the big questions answered that I needed to get answered, and I started getting quotes from various printers and decided on a printer, but I still had no money in which to publish it. And the printer told me that he would accept payments in 3 separate payments, and I didn't even have payment number 3. But at the time that I got the proof of the book ready to send to the printer, 1/3 of the money was there from a miraculous source. And then when the second third was due, same thing. When the third was due, same thing. 3 miracles occurred that just gave me the exact amount of money at the exact amount of time that I needed to pay it. Not a penny more, not a penny less. It was freaky. But that was one of those good freaky things instead of a bad one. Some of you know that for a long time I wasn't able to give lectures on this subject. I was in pretty bad health physically and extremely bad health spiritually because I'd had a lot of problems from bad outside forces trying to knock me down, all these debunking attacks and setups and on and on and on, which is another lecture in and of itself, so I won't go into that. But I'm fully convinced that positive spiritual forces have given me the energy to get back out and do this thing again because the subject is so important. And I've been threatened. I've continued to get threats from time to time, but from somewhere I'm getting the strength to go out and discuss these subjects despite the threats. And I feel strongly that this energy is coming from positive forces that I can't see, and I can't put my finger on it, but I believe that it's there. The bottom line is I see it, which you may or may not agree with, which is fine, but as I see it, it seems to me that this whole phenomenon is part of the fight between good and evil. I've seen it at every level, in the human realm, in the alien realm, in the spiritual realm. Even within our organization, within MUFON, we've seen fighting between one side and the other, and we have to admit it. It happens. And I've just seen it at every level. Because of that, I want to talk a little bit about fear. I'm totally convinced that fear is the major weapon the dark side uses to keep us under their control. That's why cover-ups are so effective. Remember, I told you that back in the early 90s, the military told me, actually I should not say the military, that's not really fair. I'm not being fair to them. What I should say is that a small group with selfish intentions within the military, okay, just a small covert group, I told you that they warned me if I talked about my experiences, they'd blow my head off. Well, I had a choice at that point in time. If I'd chosen to remain silent, I would have been contributing to their cover-up activities. I believed their threats back then and lived in total fear for about a year. I was so scared that I was constantly looking over my shoulder. I was 100% paranoid. I made up a brand new will, set forth my burial wishes and all that kind of thing. Wrote letters to my family and put them in sealed envelopes, all those things that you do if you think you're going to die, because I believe them. I believe those people, and so I lived that way for a year, and I can tell you that it was no way to live at all. It was no fun. So I decided that I'd rather be dead than to have to live in fear all the time. And besides that, my conscience wouldn't allow me to remain silent because I didn't feel that being silent about this was the right thing to do. That said, please know that I appreciate your interest in this subject so very much because it affects so many people. And I feel that I'm speaking on behalf of all of us experiencers when I say that I appreciate everything you all are doing or can do to help promote the cause of exposing this truth. So thank you very much.